So the first thing that you're going to do, get your rotary cutter ready. If you've got a seam roller, if you've got a ruler. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to trim around your foundation paper pieces and have a nice straight piece of cardboard. It's really important the piece of cardboard is straight. If possible, leave a little margin around you don't cut exactly on the outer edge of the pattern piece. Leave as much margin as you can. In fairness, there's not a great deal on here, but yeah, you don't want to cut straight on the line. I'm going to lay my pieces out, and you're going to start with piece letter A, and you'll start with number 1. So you can see this is the shape B1, and I've made a nice big piece. So you're going to turn it over to the unprinted side. Okay, so the printed side has the shapes and the letters on it. You're going to turn it over to the unprinted side, and you're going to take your pattern piece B1, which is going to be the right side, so the patterned piece, and you're going to place it over the top. Okay, and this is the only time you'll have to do it, but I'm just going to hold it up to the light and make sure, I don't know if you can see this, if I hold it up to the light, I can see that I have about 1/4 inch seam allowance above the line between B1 and B2. And I'm going to pop a pin on that seam line so you can see what I mean. So on the wrong side of my piece of paper, I have put the fabric the right side up. Then I'm going to find piece B2. So as long as you know how to count from 1 to 5, I think, you'll be okay. Oh, there might be a 6. Okay. Possibly 1 6.
You need to know
Sorry.
your alphabet as well.
You need to be in the right order.
Yeah.
So I've now got my next piece, B2. It is all written down.
Right.
So now I'm going to take my next piece, B2, and I'm going to put it right sides together, which is what we normally do, on top of the piece I've just put on, and then I'm going to flip it over and pin it. Okay, and that is what we need. This is the fiddliest bit, the first bit. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold it back because I've put a pin on the line, and I'm just going to make sure it easily fits my B2 piece. It's massive. Okay, I've made it specifically nice and big for you. You could use your 1/4 inch foot to do this stitching, but especially if you have a 1/4 inch foot that has the little metal guide that goes alongside, you might find that gets in the way. So I tend to use my normal foot, and I have this foot here, which on my Bernina is a number 20. And it is a nice wide foot, and the reason I like it is because it holds everything down. It's obviously our 1/4 inch foot's quite narrow. This has got a nice it's nice and wide. It's also an open toe foot, which means I can see where I'm going, so I'm just going to pop that on. I'm also very importantly going to lower my stitch length. So my stitch length is usually about 2.2 when I switch my machine on, and I'm going down to about 175. Especially if you have a 1/4 inch foot with the guide, I'd take it off for this because it will just get in your way. Just using my normal needle. Don't put a new needle in for this because you'll need to change it at the end. So I've got my normal thread, my normal needle. All I've done is lowered my stitch. So if you remember, my fabric are right sides together, and I'm going to stitch on this line that goes between 1 and 2. I can stitch in the seam allowance, but when I'm on the actual line, I'm going to back stitch a couple of stitches. Okay. So you can always stitch in your seam allowance, that's not a problem. So I just always lower my needle. Remember, shorten your stitch length. So I'm just going to start off in the seam allowance. I've done 3 stitches, and then I am going to just reverse stitch to the line, and then I'm sewing on the line. Taking my pins out. The reason I'm doing those back stitches is because we're going to be tearing the paper out. and there's a risk that those stitches could come undone. So I just do a couple of back stitches. If you have a scissor cutter on your machine, absolutely I would now scissor cut that off. I don't have a scissor cutter on my machine, so I have to pull mine out. I don't
know what I might.
Absolutely fine to use your scissor cutter if it's, yeah, if you've got one.
But I didn't last time.
Yeah, if you don't shorten your stitch length, the stitches will come out. Okay, so I've stitched on the line between 1 and 2. Right, then I'm going to fold it over. I'm just going to, with my fingernail, just crease that. And then I'm going to use my little seam roller, or you can use a little iron, whatever works for you. And that is your first piece on, that's it. And that's the hardest bit. Everything else is quite straightforward, but those first 1 and 2, once, you know, you just need to get your head around it. So now my piece of fabric covers B2. I'm just going to pop a pin in there to stop it flapping about, and a pin in there to stop that flapping about that. Then what I'm going to do is take my piece of straight cardboard, and as it says on the tin, I'm going to place the edge, the straight edge, on the line I want to stitch next. So I've put B2 on, so my next piece is 3. So I put my piece of cardboard on the line between 2 and 3. Okay, so literally just like that. Can you see? So there's 2, there's 3. I'm putting my piece of cardboard on the line between 2 and 3. Then I fold my paper over. If there's some stitches in the seam allowance, you can just tear those back. And I've creased my piece of paper over my cardboard. I'm going to take my add a quarter ruler. If you don't have one of these, you just use a standard ruler. The advantage of this is the lip of that 1/4 inch hooks on the cardboard. I've kept the piece of cardboard in there. That gives me a little edge for my ruler to sit on, and then I can just cut that seam allowance off. Okay, keep that bit. You don't need it for this project, but it's a reasonable piece. Okay, so now I have got a 1/4 inch seam allowance along the edge of my piece. So if I do that, okay, so I can fold the piece of paper over, put my piece of cardboard to one side, and now I pick up my piece number 3, B3, which is a leaf. Okay, so I take my piece 3, turn my piece of paper over, I place my piece number 3 on that edge because that's my seam allowance. Then, if for peace of mind, I can pop a couple of pins on that line between 2 and 3. You don't have to do that, and the more of this you do, you won't worry about the pin, but certainly when you're starting off, it's a little top tip. It just gives you the reassurance that when I fold that over, and the reason I have done that is because it's quite tight at this end. I'm going to pass it round so you can see. I've laid that on there and thought, oh, there's plenty big enough. But actually when I turn it over, if I hold it up to the light, I can see it's very tight down this corner, so I need to reposition. And I've deliberately done that because it's very easy to think, oh, it's plenty big enough, it'll easily cover that. But when you fold it back, it's very tight in that corner. So by just doing that little pin test, I can easily adjust the pin. However, unpicking very small stitches from paper is quite tricky and annoying. So ideally you kind of want to position it so it's equally hanging over the side, so I will readjust that. So now I'm just going to recheck that. That's better. It's got much more coverage down on this corner. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch that. So I'm always going to stitch on the printed side of the paper. Again, I can start stitching in the seam allowance, that's fine. Just make sure I don't take the thread out of my needle. So don't worry about an extra stitch or 2 in the seam allowance, that will just tear out. What's important is that once you get onto the main piece, you just reverse and do 2 or 3 stitches, and then you're going to stitch along that line. Obviously take your pin out, and because I use the open foot, I can easily see where I'm going. I get to the end of that line, one more stitch, I'm going to just reverse 2 or 3 stitches and then just finish in there. Again, if you've got a scissor feature, you can clunk clunk and cut that off. I reverse because when I tear the papers out afterwards, it can just loosen those stitches. So I've put the green leaf on number 3, my next piece is number 4, so I'm going to put my straight edge between 3 and 4, put it on there, fold it over, crease the paper, get my ruler, it's got the little lip, I'm trimming a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, now I'm going to pick up piece number 4, which is here. I lay that piece on there. Again, I'm going to just pop a pin in to check my seam allowance. Yeah, there's loads of room there. So start sewing in it. Sometimes, depending on the complexity of the pattern, you start sewing not in the seam allowance. The pattern, the piece of fabric piece is in the center of other pieces. So I haven't got that run up. So again, I think that's why the reversing is useful. But it's personal choice, you know. And if you do forget, it's not the end of the world. I suppose I've just got into the habit of doing it. So the last piece, I've done number 4, so I am now going to do the last piece, which is number 5. It's a nice straight piece. Fold that over, get my ruler. The most important thing is to remember to trim that seam allowance, because if you cut it on the line, it's not going to work. So I need piece number 5, there it is. Last piece. It's a straight one, so I know that's going to fit. When I start sewing, I tuck the end of my thread under my foot, and that helps as well. It just sort of holds it in place. So I'll fold that over. Here's my seam. At this point, I probably would normally get up and press it with the iron. In many instructions for foundation paper piecing, that would be the end, other than trimming it. What I do, and it's just what I do, is I literally stitch all the way around the inside, literally just inside, and I'm going to show you, I'm literally going to stitch inside the outer seam allowance edge. I'm literally stitching a stitch inside. It's optional, you don't have to do this. I just find when I'm piecing the piece units together, I find it easier if they're actually not flapping around. And for the sake of a few inches of stitching. this stitch is going to be cut off, so it's going to be either be the seam allowance or it's going to be cut off. So that is my finished piece. I need to rejig that bit there. But then what you're going to do is cut all the way around the outside on the outer edge of the seam allowance. So you will end up with the left, so that's one side.